All right, first rule of this channel, we not talk about this channel. Second rule of this channel, this is not legal advice. So I've been doing a lot of takes tonight. I want to get this done on Tuesday so I can get it out Wednesday morning. The draft is Thursday. I talked to one of my co-managers. We may actually be able to get together and stream a little bit during the draft, probably moving towards Friday, if anything. I am expecting to do content Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, probably into next week, breaking all the stuff down because there's going to be a lot going on with all the individual landing spots of your quarterbacks, your tight ends, your running backs, and your wide receivers. This is going to be the video on the quarterback and tight end landing spots. And long story short is in redraft, quarterbacks and tight ends probably aren't going to be relevant. In Dynasty, there's a lot to break down because, again, quarterbacks and tight ends are more valuable relative to wide receivers and running backs because quarterbacks put up the most points and tight ends have the best opportunity to give you a positional advantage. You can't replace the tight end points the same way you can the other positions, and quarterbacks can give you like that, 20 to 30 point a week ceiling to floor. Running backs have a short shelf life in Dynasty, so they have more value in redraft, and then wide receivers are, somewhere in between. Wide receivers grow on trees. So when we look at this year's tight end class, Brock Bowers is, the unicorn, except for the fact that I just don't think he's going to be utilized well at the NFL level, and he has to meet certain criterias that usually go on when it comes to the tight end position. Being the number one or number two in their offense, or being relevant as the number three in a higher volume passing offense, and they're just not going to utilize his skills probably at the NFL level. It's just because they're dumb. I also have written down here as we get into our quarterbacks. First and foremost is that opportunity is king, in fantasy football. But not every franchise is dumb enough to try and destroy a potential franchise rookie by throwing him to the Wolves. We're looking at you, Carolina Panthers, and Houston Texans back when they had Derek Carr's brother, David. So in this case, last year, when we have our scoring leaders, if it'll pull up, CJ Stroud was only at about 18.4 points a game. He missed week 15, 16, 17, or week 15, 16, week 17, he had a poor outing. And then week 14, he also had a poor outing, got knocked out with a concussion. So overall, even if he had played over those games, he still would have been about 18.4 points a game. And basically, apples to apples, that's going to give you like a top 10 quarterback that's not going to be that league winner tier. So again, beware of that from either a redraft or a dynasty perspective when we start breaking down some of these guys. That's why Anthony Richardson, 18.2 points. He may never have the high volume passing to go along with the rushing upside. This was only over a 4-game sample size, but again, they from a points per game standpoint, they were the same player. And CJ Stroud is going to win as the high volume guy. Anthony Richardson is going to be the dual threat quarterback that's more advantageous from a fantasy perspective. The other things I've written down in my notes, and I'm not going to pull this up again, is the certain guys like Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and Jalen Hurts were not fantasy relevant as rookies. Kyler Murray was a first overall pick. Justin Herbert was third quarterback off the board. Dak Prescott was, and he went in the 4th round, and Russ was quarterback 11 as a rookie. He went in round 3. Dak had like 5 or 6 rushing touchdowns. Russ had like 500 yards rushing. So did Kyler. Justin Herbert was the high volume passing guy at 4,300 yards, 30 touchdowns. And he did also have like 5 rushing touchdowns on that season. And he finished as quarterback 7. So that gives you an idea of the road that some of these guys are going to have to go down to be fantasy relevant as rookies. When it comes to dynasty, when we start breaking down some of these guys, I probably have this pulled up from the tight ends. But when we look at dynasty perspective, it's also going to be landing spot. Are they going to have the good coaching? Are they going to have the weapons? Are they going to have an offensive line? That's going to be harder to look at, because if a team is drafting early enough to get these guys, they probably are missing at least one of those things to be drafting in that position in the first place. Certain guys to break down real quick are Caleb Williams, expecting him to go to the Bears. It looks like a very good position. Caleb Williams is probably going to have more value in redraft, expecting that he can put together something along the lines of a Jordan Love season early, maybe a little bit more rushing upside. I don't think he's necessarily going to get into this Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts tier. But from a rushing perspective, like maybe Trevor Lawrence, like 339, 4 touchdowns as a rookie, I definitely could see that he could get up to like 500 yards rushing. And in that like 7 touchdowns, it depends on how the Bears are going to use them in the red zone. But in Dynasty, I'd probably be pushing him further down the road. I just don't think he's going to keep that rushing upside later on in his career. And then he's probably going to be a little bit closer to CJ Stroud down the line. Less rushing upside, potentially being a more of a higher volume passing guy. And then the other guys to look at, Jane Daniels is the guy with the rushing upside coming into the season, not Lamar Jackson, but for fantasy perspectives, close enough. If he's able to go to the Redskins at pick 2, that will be really interesting. The other landing spots like the Broncos, the Giants, the Patriots, probably not going to be in the best situation. Pat's probably being the worst. The Giants next. Broncos maybe okay from a fantasy perspective. Down the line, it gets a little bit murkier because we're going to be trying to parse out can we get tools together? Part of that's going to be like who also comes in the draft. Are these guys going to be bringing in wide receivers? So the best landing spot right now, and this is going to be a little bit of a hard road, is going to be Minnesota, either because they trade up and get a guy or they sit at 11 and just takes who falls to them. Projects to be a higher volume passing offense. That means that a nimbly bimbly guy is going to have more opportunities to run. That would be the best case scenario. However, Sam Darnold's there. I bet Sam Darnold is going to be a little bit of a sleeper in redraft. Not going to be surprising if that rookie can't take the job away from him. So again, even if we get the right rookie there, it may not end up being his year again. Not all teams want to break their potential franchise quarterback. They'll let him sit for a year, and then we'll have our breakout next year. So looking at some of the other guys like Drake May, JJ McCarthy, Bo Nix, I do think have rushing upside. Drake May probably the most. Bo Nix can also kind of do some of those things. Probably a little bit more of a game manager with Bo Nix. Drake May might be a little bit more of your gunslinger with some deceptive athletic ability. And JJ McCarthy is probably right in between the two of them. And if you've been watching enough stuff, everybody's going to say like there isn't enough tape on JJ McCarthy, which is probably true. Drake May is probably flawed. He has to fix some things. Bo Nix may just be a product of the system and may not have be anything more than a game manager. The other guy, and I brought this up this year, is Sam Hartman. He could end up being like this year's like poor man's Gardner Minshew, which means that he potentially could end up being a starter. I think there may be a little bit of that to him, but he's not going to be fantasy relevant. Depending, or even with the landing spot, he's probably not going to hit the high enough passing volume, the talent, or the rushing upside to get it done. He was only like a 4.8 40, one of the only quarterbacks that ran. Let's see. Moving on from this, I already talked about that. So tight ends, we'll move on to that. There's only really one tight end in this class. Remember that tight ends tend to break out year 3 or second contract. The only guy is Brock Bowers, heavily dependent on his landing spot. I do sort of like some of the other guys like Stover. I think Sino's probably the biggest sleeper of the bunch. Theo Johnson's going to be the athletic measurables guy, big, fast, depending on landing spots. May not have any of these guys may not have dynasty value other than speculative if you can parse out the contract. So again, landing spot's going to be a big deal depending on can we figure out a way that they end up being the number 2 or number 1 in their offense. That would be the way to go. And then there's guys like Bell and Culp is may not go drafted 447 in the 40. He would be the guy to put the money on when it comes to athletic ability and then return on investment. Would be him in Dynasty, regardless of where he goes. So then trying to figure out like Brock Bowers in particular, because I don't necessarily think there's going to be another guy in redraft that's going to have value. Maybe Carolina, because he could end up being the number 1 attached to Bryce Young. The Bengals need to be the number 3 behind Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Down the line, he'd have more value in Dynasty, Joe Burrow being the quarterback. Denver would be interesting. He could theoretically be the number 1 there, no quarterback. There's a few other ones I thought were interesting. Indianapolis could maybe happen. Don't know how interesting it would be from a redraft perspective. Down the line, that might be a little bit more interesting. The Chargers, I don't it would be interesting. I don't think they'll pull the trigger on that one. Rams, I could definitely see potentially thinking about that. He would maybe slot into number 3, attached to Matt Stafford down the line. The number 2, even the number 1, is within the range of outcomes there. Miami would be a little interesting at 21 if Bowers goes there, because slotting into a high volume passing offense, even though he's going to be the number 3, he'd be draftable at that point. Some of these teams with Brock Bowers, he wouldn't even be draftable. Minnesota, probably not. I've seen mocks where Bowers ends up going to New England at certain points in the draft. That would be really ugly, other than the fact that he probably would be the number 1 in that offense. I could definitely see him going to New Orleans at 14 overall. That would be a little interesting. Could theoretically be the number 1 there with a serviceable quarterback. That's the only thing that really matters to us. I could definitely see Brock Bowers going at 22. The Eagles, they do tend to pick up guys that fall. Probably wouldn't be draftable in redraft, and in dynasty, would be a little bit interesting to speculate on that overall. San Francisco, I can see Bowers going to, if he falls down the line to replace Kittle, maybe be the number 2 in that offense. Doubt with those two. He would be interesting to go to Washington paired with a new quarterback, except for the fact that Washington would have to trade up to get Bowers. And again, the other guys that we're looking at with your notes that I think are interesting, or your Theo Johnson, probably not going to be fantasy relevant. And I'll explain this real quick before I get out of here and keep this video relatively short. Is last year with Sam Laporta finishing at 14.1 points a game, tight end 1 overall in points scored. He was an outlier with 10 touchdowns scored. He has a similar stat line to David Njoku, who had 4 touchdowns left. So when we look at guys like Travis Kelce, when he's pulling down his 1,400 yards receiving and 11 touchdowns, that's what makes the tight end position, positionally having the advantage over other guys when we can find a unicorn like a Kelce or a Mark Andrews doing that 1,300 yard season. So when Sam Laporta, who is a league winner last year, is able to do that based off of draft capital, and not actually because he's that unicorn that puts him so far ahead into this special elite category of tight end. So right now with Laporta, if he's going to be that guy, there's relatively no difference between drafting Sam Laporta tight end 1 at like 14.1 points a game, and David Njoku, George Kittle, Mark Andrews if he's healthy, Evan Ingram, TJ Hawkinson, or Travis Kelce. Like they're the same guy from a fantasy perspective, points per game. So that's something to be paying attention to. We want to be searching for those outliers, those guys that end up basically being like wide receiver 6, wide receiver 5. Those guys are harder to find, and that's why speculating on the ability for Dalton Kincaid to be the number 1 attached to Josh Allen makes him potentially the most valuable guy in all of fantasy.